The image of the werewolf has one of the longest and most complex histories in European culture. Long before it became a figure of horror cinema or popular fiction, the werewolf existed as a mythological and religious symbol rooted in humanity's earliest attempts to understand nature, violence, and transformation. The earliest references to humans turning into wolves appear in the ancient world. In ancient Greece, lycanthropy was closely associated with divine punishment. One of the most famous myths tells the story of King Lycaon, who attempted to deceive Zeus by serving him human flesh. As punishment for this act of sacrilege, Zeus transformed Lycaon into a wolf, condemning him to live as the very beast that mirrored his moral corruption. In this context, transformation was not random or contagious. It was a direct response from the gods, a physical manifestation of moral transgression. The wolf was not merely an animal, but a symbol of savagery, exile, and the loss of human order. Among the Norse and other Germanic peoples, however, the wolf carried a more ambivalent meaning. Rather than being solely a curse, the adoption of a wolf's nature could be a source of strength. Berserkers and warrior cults were believed to enter altered states of consciousness, taking on the spirit of wolves or bears to gain ferocity and fearlessness in battle. In these cultures, the boundary between man and beast was porous and symbolic. To become wolf-like was not necessarily to lose humanity, but to temporarily transcend it. The werewolf in this sense was a figure of ritual, myth, and controlled transformation. As societies became more centralized and agricultural, attitudes toward wolves began to change. Wolves increasingly came to be seen as threats to livestock, property, and human life. This shift in perception slowly reshaped the symbolic meaning of the wolf itself. Stories of human-wolf transformation persisted, but their tone darkened. What had once been a sacred or heroic association began to acquire elements of fear and danger. The werewolf became less a ritual figure and more a creature lurking on the margins of civilization. Still, in the pre-Christian world, such beliefs remained largely within the realm of folklore. There were no systematic attempts to prosecute or eliminate werewolves as real threats. Fear existed, but it had not yet been codified into law or theology. This balance would be fundamentally disrupted with the spread of Christianity across Europe. As we have seen, the earliest forms of the werewolf myth emerged in the pre-Christian world. In ancient Greece, transformation into a wolf was a divine punishment for hubris and sacrilege. Among the Norse, the adoption of a wolf spirit was viewed as a shamanic source of power available to chosen warriors. In these pagan worldviews, the werewolf belonged to the realm of myth and magic, closely tied to gods and ancient rituals. However, as Christianity spread across Europe and suppressed older belief systems, the entire worldview began to change radically. There was now only one true God, and any supernatural power that did not originate from him could have only one source: the devil. Within this new theological framework, the magical transformation of a human into a wolf could no longer be understood as divine punishment or sacred ritual. It was now interpreted as the result of a direct alliance with demonic forces. a conscious and voluntary act of heresy. Medieval theologians and witch hunters argued that, in order to become a werewolf, a person must first renounce God and the Christian faith. According to these beliefs, the future werewolf performed a blasphemous ritual in which he surrendered his soul to Satan in exchange for earthly power. In return, the devil granted the ability to change shape, often providing a magical object, a belt, an ointment, or a skin, that enabled the transformation into an animal form. This represented a radical and terrifying reinterpretation of the myth. The werewolf was no longer a tragic victim of a curse. He was now portrayed as a conscious, malicious servant of absolute evil. This shift had horrifying and very real consequences. The werewolf was removed from folklore and placed into the sphere of criminal and religious law. An accusation of lycanthropy automatically implied charges of witchcraft, heresy, and devil worship. This allowed authorities to arrest, interrogate, and prosecute suspects using the full brutal machinery of the Inquisition and secular courts during the era of witch hunts. Belief in werewolves ceased to be a matter of rural superstition. It became a crime against God and the state, a crime punished with ruthless determination. This new status of the werewolf as a criminal heretic is vividly illustrated by one of the earliest documented historical cases. We moved to the French town of Dole in the year 1573. The region was gripped by terror. A series of brutal attacks on children plunged the local population into panic. Authorities, convinced that the culprit was a loup-garou, a werewolf, officially permitted the population to hunt the creature and kill it. During this hunt, suspicion fell upon a strange and reclusive hermit named Gilles Garnier. Garnier was an extremely poor man living on the margins of society, isolated from the village. He was arrested, and under the pressure of interrogation, he confessed to monstrous crimes. His testimony became a chilling reflection of the mindset of the era. Garnier claimed that one evening, while wandering through the forest, starving and destitute, he encountered a demonic apparition. The figure offered him a bargain. He would never go hungry again, and his strength would become that of a wolf. As proof, the demon gave him a small container of magical ointment. According to Garnier, applying the ointment allowed him to transform into a wolf at will. He admitted using this power to hunt in forests and fields. He then confessed to killing at least 4 children, describing in detail how he attacked them in wolf form and brought parts of their bodies home to his wife. It is important to note that Garnier was tried by secular authorities, not the ecclesiastical Inquisition. This demonstrates that lycanthropy was already being treated not only as religious heresy, but as a tangible threat to public safety that the state itself was obligated to confront. Court records indicate that more than 50 witnesses testified against Garnier, highlighting the scale of panic that had seized the region. The Court of Dole found Gilles Garnier guilty of lycanthropy and witchcraft and sentenced him to be burned alive. His case became a sensation and was perceived as undeniable legal proof that werewolves existed and derived their power through pacts with the devil. It was believed that their evil could be eradicated only through the purifying fire of execution. This case established a grim precedent, but it was far from the last. If the story of Gilles Garnier set the standard, then the events that followed in Germany represented the culmination of werewolf hysteria. Peter Stump and the peak of the hysteria. If the case of Gilles Garnier was a sinister precedent, the events that soon unfolded in Germany marked the apex of werewolf panic. This was perhaps the most infamous trial in history. The case of Peter Stump, known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. The events began in 1589 in a rural area that had lived in fear for 25 years. A mysterious predator terrorized the population, attacking livestock and people alike, leaving mutilated bodies behind. The scale and savagery of the attacks appeared so inhuman that for the locals there was only one explanation. It was a werewolf. Gradually, suspicion focused on a single individual, a wealthy but disliked farmer named Peter Stump. Outwardly, he appeared to be a respectable widower, but rumors had surrounded him for years. In the autumn of that year, a group of hunters allegedly cornered a massive wolf in the forest. According to sensational accounts that later circulated, the moment the animal was about to be captured, it miraculously transformed into a naked man. Peter Stump. He was immediately seized and brought before the authorities. The mystery that had terrorized the region for a quarter century was believed to be solved, and the trial began. Subjected to brutal torture on the rack, Stump eventually broke and delivered a confession that exceeded even the darkest expectations of his judges. He claimed that at the age of 12, he had entered into a pact with the devil. In exchange for his soul, Satan allegedly gave him a magical belt made of wolfskin. By wearing it, he could transform into a gigantic, ravenous wolf, powerful, ferocious, with eyes that burned in the darkness. What followed was a confession to every crime attributed to the beast over the previous 25 years. Stump admitted to slaughtering livestock and then began listing human victims. The judges listened in horror as he described the murders of 13 children and 2 pregnant women. He confessed to acts of brutality and desecration so extreme that they surpassed anything then considered human evil. The most horrifying admission was his claim that he had killed and eaten his own son. This was a narrative of evil on an almost unimaginable scale. A story that perfectly confirmed the fears, religious doctrines, and superstitions of the time. Stump was found guilty and his execution was scheduled. His case was treated as final and irrefutable proof of the reality of demonic werewolves. However, to truly understand this trial, a fundamental question must be asked. Where does this information come from? Unlike the case of Gilles Garnier, detailed court transcripts from Stump's trial have not survived. Almost everything we know is based on a series of popular pamphlets printed and distributed throughout Germany and even England shortly after his execution. This coincided with the rise of a powerful new technology, the printing press. These pamphlets became the crime bestsellers of the 16th century. Cheap, mass-produced, filled with lurid stories and horrifying illustrations, their purpose was not to inform, but to terrify. They were the viral media of their time. These texts were not objective journalism. They were propaganda, One was titled A Monstrous Lesson, a name that perfectly captured their intent to reinforce religious and social order during a period of extreme instability. Peter Stump's story fit this narrative perfectly. He was wealthy and unpopular during an era of war, plague, religious conflict, and famine. He became a convenient scapegoat, a single figure onto whom society could project its collective fears. His confession, extracted under torture, was almost certainly a constructed script dictated by interrogators and repeated only to end the pain. It contained every element expected by witch hunters: a demonic pact, a magical object, and a list of crimes sufficient to justify unlimited cruelty. Thus, the true story of Peter Stump is not so much the story of a werewolf as it is a story about how myths are created. It is an example of how a society consumed by fear and empowered by new media can manufacture the perfect monster. The real question is not whether Peter Stump was a werewolf. The far more disturbing question is whether he was a murderer at all, or merely a tragic victim of collective hysteria, sacrificed to the fears of his age. Part 5. The End of Trials and the Turn to Reason. The werewolf hunts that peaked in the 16th century and claimed the lives of people like Gilles Garnier and Peter Stump could not continue indefinitely. As Europe gradually entered the Age of Reason, more thinkers and jurists began to question the unquestionable authority of witch hunters. Old dogmas began to fracture under the pressure of skepticism and rational thought. A decisive turning point came in the 1630s with a case that marked the beginning of the end of werewolf trials. The central figure was a teenager named Jean Grenier. Unlike previous defendants, Grenier was not an isolated outcast suspected by his community. He was only 13 years old and openly boasted that he was a werewolf. He voluntarily shared frightening stories with friends and peers. Grenier claimed that he had encountered a mysterious man in the forest, the Lord of the Forest, who gave him a wolf skin and a magical ointment that allowed him to transform into a beast. In his accounts, he described attacks on children and claimed that human flesh was the sweetest of all foods. These confessions were so detailed and disturbing that the boy was arrested and put on trial for lycanthropy. The local court, still guided by traditional religious beliefs, found him guilty and sentenced him to death. However, the case was transferred to a higher judicial authority, the Parlement of Bordeaux, and there something unprecedented occurred. The judges, including the influential magistrate Pierre Delancre, saw before them not a servant of the devil, but a deeply deluded and likely malnourished child. In a landmark decision that altered legal history, the higher court overturned the death sentence. The official verdict stated that Jean Grenier was not a heretic, but suffered from melancholic delusion. This was one of the first cases in Europe in which lycanthropy was explained not by demonic influence, but by mental illness. Instead of execution, Grenier was sentenced to lifelong confinement in a monastery where he would receive religious instruction and attempts at rehabilitation. The era of burning werewolves was coming to an end. It seemed that the monster had finally been exposed and reduced to an illusion of the diseased mind. Yet only a century later, a real physical predator would appear in the forests of France, proving that fear had not vanished. From 1764 to 1767, rural regions of south-central France were gripped by terror. An unknown and extraordinarily ferocious creature, known to history as the Beast of Gévaudan, was responsible for more than 100 deaths, mostly women and children. This was no longer a local village panic. The events became a national crisis and one of the earliest international media phenomena. Reports spread from local newspapers to the salons of Paris and the royal courts of Europe. Surviving witnesses described the creature as something between a wolf and something else. It was said to be the size of a calf, with a massive chest, a large dog-like head, and reddish-brown fur. It was characterized as incredibly fast, intelligent, and possessing terrifying strength, capable of carrying off victims with ease. The scale of terror was so great that King Louis XV himself intervened. He sent royal hunters and thousands of soldiers to the region, offering enormous rewards for the beast's destruction. This was the age of enlightenment, and the state's response was rational. Organized hunts, examinations of bodies, and attempts at scientific analysis. When royal forces failed, the burden fell to local inhabitants. History preserves the names of real heroes, such as the young Marie-Jeanne Vallée, who reportedly fended off the beast with a spear fitted with a bayonet. The creature was finally killed in June 1767 by a local hunter and farmer named Jean Chastel. At this moment, a new element was added to werewolf legend. According to later accounts, Chastel killed the beast not with an ordinary lead bullet, but with a consecrated silver bullet that he had cast himself. Whether this episode is true or a later embellishment, it represents one of the first direct associations between silver bullets and the killing of a real, werewolf-like creature. The true identity of the Beast of Gévaudan remains unknown. Theories range from unusually large wolves to an escaped exotic animal such as a hyena, or even a serial killer using a trained animal. The true significance of this story lies not in what the beast was, but in the context of the response. It was the perfect monster of the Enlightenment. While superstitious explanations persisted, the dominant reaction was rational. Hunting, analysis, reports, not exorcism. The werewolf underwent yet another transformation, from demonic heretic to cryptid, a biological mystery to be studied rather than cursed. Hollywood and the birth of the modern werewolf. By the end of the 18th century, the real werewolf, as a figure of trials, village panics, and criminal investigation, had nearly vanished. But the myth itself did not die. It merely changed its habitat. It moved from courtrooms and taverns to the pages of fiction. The Romantic movement of the 19th century revived interest in the dark, irrational side of human nature. Writers and poets became fascinated with the idea of dual identity, the hidden beast inside the civilized individual. The werewolf proved to be a perfect metaphor for this inner conflict. During this period, the image of the lycanthrope was gradually stripped of its religious framework. He was no longer a conscious servant of the devil who had willingly made a pact. Instead, he became a tragic figure, a person cursed by forces beyond his control. 19th century literature laid the foundation for the modern perception of the werewolf. One of the most important additions was transformation, triggered by the full moon. This motif is largely absent from medieval sources and is a relatively late literary invention. Equally significant was a shift from external evil to internal struggle. The primary source of horror was no longer demons or witchcraft, but human nature itself. The monster was born not from outside forces, but from within. The final consolidation of this image occurred in the 20th century with the rise of cinema, especially Hollywood. Film unified scattered folkloric and literary elements into a single recognizable archetype. The decisive moment came with Universal Studios' The Wolf Man in 1941. This film established the canon that continues to define the werewolf to this day. In the film, the werewolf is an ordinary man afflicted by a curse after being bitten by another lycanthrope. He is not evil by choice, but a victim of circumstance, torn between human morality and animal instinct. The film permanently zekrapil the key elements of the myth: the full moon as the trigger for transformation, uncontrollable rage in beast form, and silver as the only reliable means of destroying the creature. Most importantly, silver acquired symbolic rather than religious significance. It no longer needed to be consecrated by the church. Its purity and rarity stood in contrast to the tainted nature of the curse. The Hollywood werewolf is neither demon nor criminal. He is a tragic figure who evokes both fear and sympathy. He reflects modern anxieties, the fear of losing control, repressed desires, and the darker sides of the human psyche. In an era shaped by world wars, psychoanalysis, and rapid technological change, this image proved especially resonant. The werewolf became a mirror of the human mind, a symbol of the struggle between civilization and primal instinct. Modern popular culture continues to reinvent the archetype. In books, films, and television series, werewolves may appear as monsters, romantic heroes, anti-heroes, or even protectors of society. Yet despite all variations, the core of the myth remains unchanged. The story of the werewolf still speaks of fear. Fear of what lies hidden within the human being, and of the fragile boundary between reason and instinct. Thus, the werewolf's journey traces a path from ancient ritual and divine punishment, through religious hysteria and judicial terror, to psychological metaphor and cultural symbol. A monster once believed to be a real threat became a way of talking about human nature itself. And in that transformation, the werewolf may have become the most human of all monsters. The history of the werewolf is not the history of a creature, but the history of changing human explanations for fear, violence, and identity. Across centuries, the werewolf evolved from a sacred mythological figure into a religious criminal, then into a subject of medical and psychological interpretation, and finally into a symbol of inner conflict in modern culture. Once hunted as a literal danger, the werewolf survives today as a mirror, reflecting humanity's enduring struggle with its own darker instincts.